Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Every day there are countless books and articles that are published offering the key on how to make your business a success. It's easy to feel overwhelmed trying to keep up and run your business. That's why Deb Creer created the Business Power Hour. Keep up on the latest trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. Let the Business Power Hour do the heavy work for you.
Good morning, good morning. I am Deb Creer, and I am passionate about giving professionals the tools that they need to make themselves and their businesses as successful as possible. And today, we're going to be talking about what is probably one of the most underused, but it should be one of the most used tools to be successful in not only business, but in life. And that's listening. So please join me in welcoming Oscar Trimboli to our program today. Welcome, Oscar.
G'day, Deb. I'm looking forward to listening to your questions today.
Great. Well, as you can tell, Oscar is not here in the United States. This is one of the way cool things about technology. You are actually, it's the next day for Oscar. I love when we're able to do that. It's like we're in a time warp thing. But, technology really is one of the really great things, but it has also, and we'll be talking about this, made listening more difficult and much more of a skill that we don't even have anymore. So let me tell people just a little bit about you, Oscar, and then we'll jump into this. So Oscar Trimboli is a coach, supervisor, speaker, and author of Deep Listening, Impact Beyond Words, the 125-400 Rule, The Art and Science of Listening, and Breakthroughs, How to Confront Your Assumptions. Through his work with chairs, boards of directors, and executive teams in local, regional, and global organizations, Oscar has experienced firsthand the transformational impact leaders and organizations can have when they listen beyond the words. He consults to organizations including Cisco, Google, HSBC, News Corp, PayPal, Qantas, TripAdvisor, helping executives and their teams listen to what's unsaid by customers and employees. Oscar lives in Sydney with his wife, Jennie, where he helps first-time runners and ocean swimmers conquer their fears. See, that's me. I'm no ocean. There's sharks out there. And contributes to the cure for cancer as part of CAN2, a cancer research charity. So again, Oscar, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, you've got more chance of getting hit by a bus on the sidewalk than you have of
I
being
know.
taken by a shark, Deb. Too
But
many
see,
people have watched Jaws and it's really programmed into their mind.
well, and I'm from Colorado, so completely landlocked. So I
Yeah.
never went to an ocean until, I'll be honest, I think it was after I had seen Jaws. And, and no, I'll go in up to my knees, but yeah, so I just have to come visit so we can take care of this.
Yeah. Well, I learnt to swim as an adult, so no excuses for you either.
This is true. This is true. I love it. Well, let's go back a little bit in time. We've been talking about you're ahead of me. I'm, all these various things. How is it that you decided that listening and helping people learn how to listen better is your passion in life?
I think listening decided for me. I don't think I decided. I think there was a series of events that I look back on in life where I go, there was a signpost, there was a signal. Why weren't you
Hmm.
paying attention? I grew up in an area of Sydney that was heavily populated by first-time migrants
Okay.
in the time of the Vietnam War,
Mm.
people fleeing Eastern Europe, people fleeing South America and various different wars and struggles going on there as well. And our school was close to an immigration center.
Mm.
And at our school, we had 23 nationalities. And
Whoa.
the only thing that unified us was a game of cards called Briscola, which was an Italian card game
Hmm.
played in pairs against another pair diagonally opposite. And unfortunately, I could only speak one language, but most teams typically sat in their home tongue, whether it was Portuguese from Brazil or Polish or uh, coming from China or coming from places like Argentina and Chile. Those teams would comfortably play in their own language, and I was at a disadvantage
Hmm.
because I was often picked up as a spare player because there weren't enough players around.
Mhm.
And what I learned from that is how to listen to body language. Although I
Mm.
couldn't understand their
Mhm.
words, I noticed really quickly their face, their facial expressions, their
Okay.
hands, their inclination in their voice was giving away what was going on there. So I learned pretty quickly that although you can't speak the language, you can definitely listen to other
Mhm.
things. Then if we wind the clock forward, nearly a decade ago, I was sitting in a very complex budget negotiation on a video conference between Sydney, Singapore, and Seattle, our global and regional
Mhm.
headquarters at Microsoft, where I was a marketing director at the time. And our local leadership team was in the room desperately trying to get the lowest budget possible, and the regional and global teams trying to give us the highest budgets
Mhm.
possible. At the 20-minute mark, my vice president turned to me, wrote a note in a notepad, and Tracy said, "I need to see you after this meeting." And my heart sank.
I know you thought, "Oh, no."
And the only thing that was going through my head, Deb, was how many months of salary have I got in
Mhm.
the bank account?
Mhm.
Because it's kind of like when your wife says you need to talk.
Right.
It's not a good sign.
No.
So after the meeting was concluded, I stayed behind.
Mhm.
Tracy said to me, at the 20-minute mark, you completely changed the trajectory of your meeting. Do you realize it's the way you listen that's one of your superpowers? And if you could code that, you could
Mhm.
change the world. And all that was going through my head was sheer relief that I
Right.
wasn't being
You were like
fired. And all I could say to Tracy in the moment was, "Do you mean code or do you mean code?" And she said, "No, I mean code." So
Mhm.
what she meant was, could I write into software the way I listened? And then 4 weeks later, when we were having the exact opposite meeting, as the head office, we had to distribute our budgets to our states around the country. My CFO and chief operating officer asked me to observe the meeting they were part of, take notes, and talk to them about how they could improve their
Mhm.
listening. And I said to Brian and Tony, I got better things to do. I'm running a $1 billion budget
Right.
here.
Mhm.
I got the biggest product set in Microsoft in this country. We're going through this big transition from moving from one-off software pricing to pay by pay by the month.
Mhm.
And you want me to teach you how to listen? And they
Mhm.
went, yeah. And I went, oh, really? Is this a thing? And
And your
all I could
body language went, "No."
and all I could remember was Tracy saying, if you could code this, you could
Mhm.
change the world.
Mhm.
So for the next 6 months, I was part of Brian's leadership team meetings, and I debriefed him on how to listen. And I had to start to notice what he was doing well and what he wasn't.
Mhm.
And from that became the journey and the quest to create 100 million deep
Mhm.
listeners in the world, which
Mhm.
is where we're at today with you and your audience.
Great. Well, now you talk about deep listening. What do you mean by that?
Well, for a lot of us trained in the workforce, probably by the second, third decade of your career, you've had between 5 and 7 courses in how to speak. And if you have had any training, you may have had training on this term called active listening.
Mhm.
And active listening is great. It's handy, it's useful, and it's about listening to what's said. Deep listening is about listening to what's said and listening to what's not said.
Mhm.
Now, the neuroscience of this is fairly simple. I speak at 125 words a minute to 150 words a minute. Yet I can think at up to 900 words a minute, Deb.
Wow. Mhm.
So the likelihood the first thing out of my mouth is what I actually mean,
Mhm.
there's a 1 in 9 chance that what I say is what I mean.
Mhm.
Now, that's 11%. You get better odds at Las Vegas.
Right. Mhm.
Yet most of us just listen to the first thing people say, and we're
Mhm.
comfortable getting a conversation progressing with an 11% chance of success. Now, I don't know about you, Deb, but if I had an opportunity to ask somebody the next 150 words and the next 150
Mhm.
words, there's a high likelihood that what they say the first time isn't what they actually are
Right.
thinking. And a deep listener helps the speaker understand what they really mean.
Mhm.
And they do that with simple phrases. what else,
Mhm.
or tell me more,
Mhm.
or simply use silence. So deep listening is listening to what's unsaid.
Right. Well, I mentioned your books at the start, and I've got this great one. It's pretty cool. This is actually a box, and it's Deep Listening, Impact Beyond Words, and it contains your book, and then it contains some cards. And so we'll talk about the cards later, but here's the book. Very quick read, and when I read it last night, of course, one of the first things, and it was funny, I was telling you this before the program, listening actually is one of my problems. And part of that is my energy. I mean, I'm ready to go. I'm going to fix those problems. I'm going to do all those things. And part of it is I'm going, oh, squirrel. you know? And so I recognize that I don't listen as well as I should. Now, according to your information, I'm not in a minority. In fact, I'm in a majority. Most people don't listen like we should. So why is that? Why do we, yes, there is that squirrel, there is this, but why don't we listen as well as we should?
Deb, it's happening right now for those listening. They're completely distracted.
Hmm.
They're running, they're commuting. Welcome back.
Yes.
86% of us struggle with distraction.
Hmm.
86% of us in our database of 1,400 listeners who volunteered themselves to be researched over a period of 3 years to understand if they're making progress on their listening journey. 86% of people say they struggle with distraction even before they get to the
Hmm.
conversation, let alone in the
Right.
conversation. For a lot of us, before we turn up to the conversation, we've got our own radio station
Hmm.
playing, and it's tuned into a frequency of the last conversation we had, or possibly the next task we need
Hmm.
to do, or something we need to do this evening, or something we need to do on the weekend, or something we need to do with our children or our parents, or a vacation we need to organize. Or it could just be something as simple as, I wonder what I need to contribute to this
Hmm.
conversation. Now, for a lot of us, just that simple distraction, we turn up to the conversation and we're not even available to
Hmm.
listen. Most people can see in color, yet we listen in black and white, and we only listen on two dimensions. And the reason we do is because we don't understand the 5 levels of listening. Most people start by focusing on the speaker, and although that's useful, it's the wrong place to start. If you want to build a great listening foundation to avoid distraction, you need to start with listening to yourself. You need to be prepared
Hmm.
for the conversation. You'd never go to a concert. You'd never go to a cinema. You'd never go to the movies and turn up late and halfway through it go, oh, how is this actor related to that
Hmm.
actor? What's happening with the plot here? It's, for most of us, we turn up to a conversation 20 minutes in and we're trying to fill in the gaps ourselves because we haven't tuned into the frequency of
Hmm.
the conversation. So Deb, if I could provide 3 simple tips
Sure.
that people in our database have found useful. They are very practical. They're very simple tips.
Hmm.
Tip number 1, switch off all electronic devices. Now, I know for some of
No
you, you've
phone.
completely freaked out and done a Deb and clutched it to her
Mhm.
heart. This little device is useful until it isn't.
Mhm.
And for a lot of us, when it comes to listening, switching our phone off is virtually impossible. We're like a drug addict trying to
Right.
go cold turkey. We're like an alcoholic before they go to AA. In about 2012, one of the vice presidents from my business at the time flew from Seattle to Sydney, virtually a 24-hour flight, and I was hosting Peter in front of 30 executives in a room, Deb, and in that room, they were all CEOs of different technology organizations in our local market. And Peter ran a big business, 55,000
Mm.
employees, a couple of $1 billion in revenue. So he was a busy guy. He had
Mhm.
lots on, and I introduced him. He sat at the head of the table. And as he was about to commence, he had this quizzical look on his face. And Peter stood up, walked over to his bag, took his cell phone out of his jacket pocket, switched it off and put it in his bag. And as he walked back to sit down, he faced everyone and said, "My apologies. The most important thing I can give you right now is my attention. I hope we can start right now." Now,
Mhm.
in that moment of role modeling, Deb, what do you think the rest of the room did?
Hopefully they turned off their phones, or at least put them to mute, and or turn them upside down, put them somewhere where they weren't still attached to them.
And now we're all leaders, whether we have the titles or not, and if we can role model things that gives attention rather than pay attention.
Hmm.
For me, when I hear the words pay attention, it feels like that we have to pay tax. Eh,
Right.
Whereas giving attention
Hmm.
comes from a very human place.
Hmm.
Now, of the room, there were three people who switched their phones to vibrate. The rest had switched them off.
Hmm.
And after 45 minutes, Peter left the room and went to another part of the hotel for another group of leaders he was visiting at the time. And what these CEOs said to each other in the debrief was, for me, it was shocking at the time, but it was, again, another signpost that simply said, wow, that was the most different conversation we've had with a visiting leader from a head office in probably 25 years,
Hmm.
is what most people said. We got to hear each other's
Hmm.
real problems, and he wasn't there to sell us anything. And the group that formed out of that meeting, now some of these people were competitors,
Right.
don't get me wrong,
Hmm.
but they started this group called the Peter Listening Group. And basically they got together every 6 months, and they met in a coffee shop for breakfast.
Hmm.
And the first thing they did, almost ritualistic, is they all said, "Please forgive me. The most important thing I can give you right now is my attention." And then they all switched their
Hmm.
phones off. Now, if busy executives can do it, there's no reason we can't.
Right.
But going cold turkey is hard.
Hmm.
There's a brilliant book that was written the year before last, and for the last 12 months in a row, it's been the New York Times bestseller every single month. It's called Atomic Habits by James Clear, and this book is about breaking down habit change to its most simple, as he says, atomic level. So
Hmm.
if you can't switch your phone off, Deb,
Hmm.
switch the notifications off, switch
Right.
those red dots off.
Hmm.
If you can do that, great.
Hmm.
Switch your phone to silent.
Hmm.
If you've done that, great. Then switch your phone to flight mode.
Hmm.
And then once you've done that, it'll be really simple to switch your phone
Right.
off.
Hmm.
Now, in that moment of giving people attention because you don't have the distraction, that also removes the likelihood that you would say, let's look that up on the phone rather
Hmm.
than having a conversation. So if you want to double your listening productivity, tip number 1 of 3 is simply switch off your cell phone, your
Hmm.
laptop, your tablet, whatever devices buzz, beep, or notify, um, switch them off.
Hmm.
Now, if you're a prolific note taker and you need to take notes on
Hmm.
those laptops and tablets, that's okay. Just switch them into flight mode.
Right. Turn everything else off. Hmm.
Yeah. Now, tip number 2, the deeper you breathe, the deeper you listen.
Hmm.
So before the conversation starts, before you even turn up to the conversation, just take 3 simple, deep breaths in through your nose, down the back of your throat, all the way to the bottom of your lungs. Hold just for a second, and then out through your mouth. Now, it's really simple to do, but it will change the state of your thinking in that moment. Now, if you can do it for more than 3 breaths, great. If you
Hmm.
can do it for a minute, awesome. Now, the most commented on change in the 2015 Google employee survey was a process they adopted. If there were more than 6 people at the meeting, the first minute of the meeting was complete silence.
Wow.
And it was the most commented on thing in the employee
Hmm.
survey that year. It wasn't about the stock price. It wasn't about pay. It
Hmm.
was about the fact that these meetings became more productive. Now,
Hmm.
again, if an organization as complex, as sophisticated, dealing with really big problems as Google can take a moment before every meeting, just 1 minute, for everybody to empty their mind,
Hmm.
collect their thoughts for the current meeting, we can too.
Hmm.
You can do it too. And then the third one, a hydrated brain is a listening brain.
Hmm.
So drink a glass of water for every half an hour that you're talking to somebody. As Deb proudly lifts her glass up and shows me that she's got water. Now, if you drink coffee, you're going to have to drink an extra glass of water. And when I step into a building where I'm visiting a client, Deb, I just bring this practice in. The minute I cross the lobby floor, that's my signal for me to go, okay, I'm now here to
Hmm.
serve somebody else.
Hmm.
I'm here to serve my client. So that's a signal for me to switch off my cell phone, put it in my bag.
Hmm.
Then when I step into the lift, I have two choices. If there's nobody in the lift, I can close my eyes and take 3 deep breaths.
Hmm.
If there are people in the lift and they don't want me to look too weird, I'll um, I'll keep my eyes open, but I'll look at my shoes and
Hmm.
I'll simply take 3 deep breaths. Now, you don't have to be like a yoga instructor.
Right.
That's not what I'm
We're
talking
not giving
about.
birth.
Yeah, it's very simply 3 deep breaths in
Hmm.
through, as I described earlier on. Unfortunately, I have not a great left ear. I burst the eardrum when I was quite young.
Mm.
And a couple of weeks ago, I was going up to the 46th story of a building, and about the 38th, I was doing this
Oh.
breathing thing and my ear
Hmm.
popped. So I had to step out, go to the restroom and
Hmm.
take my 3 deep breaths, and then I announced myself at
Hmm.
reception. And when I announce myself at reception, they usually offer me some kind of refreshment.
Hmm.
And I always request, look, I'd love to have water
Hmm.
and water for my guests, ideally a jug of
Hmm.
water.
Right.
Now, those 3 simple things will triple your listening productivity.
Hmm.
Now, they sound so basic, they sound so simple, yet I remember speaking to a group of leaders in a Japanese company here in Australia about 2 years ago, and the CEO did a very generous introduction, and he introduced me and he'd explained he'd read the book, and all he said was, listening is very simple to do, it's very difficult to practice. And for a lot of us, we just need to take a
Hmm.
step forward rather than trying to be perfect straight away.
Hmm.
So tip number 1, switch off the device. Tip number 2, breathe deeply. Tip number 3, drink water.
Hmm.
If you do that, you'll triple your listening productivity.
Right.
Yet most of us don't get past the device.
Hmm.
As
Oh
you were
yeah.
doing earlier, Deb,
Hmm.
you clutched your mobile,
I
your
might
cell,
miss something.
you might miss
Hmm.
something. But bear in mind, as I said earlier on, the phone is productive until it's not.
Hmm.
And please be aware that the application development industry or the app industry uses the same psychological techniques that are used on slot machines in
Hmm.
Las Vegas to keep your mind distracted while
Hmm.
keeping you pressing the button.
Right.
So they are using you until you become conscious of it. So
Hmm.
right now, as you're focused on this conversation, uh, that simple act of moving the cell phone
Hmm.
notifications off is the very first thing that you
Hmm.
can do on that
Right.
journey.
Right. And it hasn't been that long ago that we did not have cell phones glued to us. And we were perfectly fine. The world didn't come to an end. If there was an emergency, people knew how to reach us, so you gave, you had the receptionist had your phone number, whatever it was. But, the world really revolved just fine when we weren't attached to our phones. Now it's funny because I have mine here sitting here, but I have it here because it has the timer going.
Mm.
But
And
I turn
not
everything
only
else off.
does
Mm-hmm.
Deb have a phone. She loves her phone so much. It's got a special little thing stuck to the back of it
I
so she can
do.
hold it even easier.
I do. It's, it's what it's, yeah, see, makes it easier. And it's funny because anytime I go into a meeting or something, I at least mute it so that it's not making rude, obnoxious noises. And then I'll forget to turn it back on, and I'll spend half a day thinking nobody loves me because it's not making those noises. But we get used to it. How many people, and I'm guilty of this, on occasion too, have it right next to us as we're sleeping, and it's the first thing we reach out for. When we wake up in the morning, it's, what's going on? What email did we have? And again, we can get up, we can have our coffee, we can, have our meditation time, read the paper, whatever it is, before we check our email. And I tell people, if they really need to reach me, they need to call, because everything else I might not pay attention to, sometimes even for 24 hours. But it's interesting, before we started the program, I was talking about the fact that this I think, and computers too, have made listening such a problem, because we text, we email, we leave voicemails. I mean, how many times do we time when we're calling somebody so that we know they're not there, and we leave a message because we don't want to talk to them? Oh, no, don't want to talk to them. I mean, even if it's a good reason. And part of that is because we think, oh, it'll take too much time, all these various things. But we've gotten away from actually having conversations with people. I have people who have told me that the only way I am to communicate with them is text. They don't want emails. They don't want phone calls. They don't want anything. Well, you know, I'm okay with texting, but that's not the best way to reach me. But they don't want to be bothered by anything else. Now, it's, I tell people, you need to, especially with your customers, you need to find what is the best way they want to be communicated with. But we still need to get back to actually talking to them and then listening to what they say, because of course the problem is when we don't. That's where, as your book points out, we have so many misunderstandings. We, so many, we don't get the message right. We don't even get the right questions, let alone the right message, all of those various things, because we're so busy sending that text message where I'm not even quite sure what they said because they abbreviated a bunch of stuff. And so we need to get back to having conversations with people.
And for a lot of us, we don't need to learn to listen. We need to unlearn everything we've learned since we
Hmm.
were born.
Right.
At, at 20 weeks inside our mother's womb, Deb, we could distinguish our mother's voice from any other sound in the
Mm.
outside world. And quite simply, that's genetically programmed
Hmm.
into us. So we know where to get food
Right.
when we come,
Hmm.
come out into the
Hmm.
world. But at 32 weeks, we can distinguish Beethoven from Bon Jovi from Beaver.
Mm.
So 32 weeks, we're already learning to listen. Our
Hmm.
first skill that we ever learn is the skill to listen.
Hmm.
And ironically, if you're relatively healthy, the last skill you will lose as you pass away will be your gift of listening as
Mm.
well.
Hmm.
Yet the moment we are born, in fact, the timing of your birth certificate is defined by the time you scream. That
Ah.
moment you
Hmm.
scream coming into the world, that's a
Hmm.
sign of life.
Hmm.
And yet we spend the rest of our life thinking the only way we can have an impact is being noticed by speaking.
Hmm.
So what I say to everybody is listening is your birthright, and you just need to go back to the time that you were very curious as a young person,
Hmm.
where you're listening for everything. You were not only listening for what was people were saying, but you were also listening for how people were saying it
Hmm.
as well. It's interesting that the context you described, Deb, about what we call low context communication, send me a text message, send me an email, is something that's more prevalent in Western
Hmm.
context than it is in Eastern
Hmm.
context or ancient cultures. So Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, ancient cultures like the Inuit or Amazonian cultures from the jungles of the Amazon, or in Australia, the Aboriginal communities, or in New Zealand, the Maori communities.
Hmm.
All these communities have a great relationship with storytelling.
Hmm.
That's oral
Right.
storytelling. And why it's so potent is that the storytelling cultures of the earth are the listening cultures of the
Mm-hmm.
earth as well, because storytelling is training people in how to be patient, in how to listen.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing these cultures have is a great relationship with silence. Now, silence is one of the most powerful things you can do while listening, yet most people feel like the minute somebody stops, it's like a vacuum
Right.
for
We
your
have to fill
lips
it.
to start a conversation. Now, only in the West do we have these phrases called pregnant pause or
Mm-hmm.
awkward silence or deafening silence. In the East, for example, silence is a sign of wisdom. It's a sign of authority.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sign of respect. It's a sign of unifying the community and the tribes. And for a lot of us, we are very, very, very uncomfortable with high context conversations, meaning verbal conversations that are face to face,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to the synchronous dialogue via electronic means. How many misunderstandings are amplified by people reading into things in
Mm-hmm.
an email that were never intended,
Right.
or the opposite?
Mm-hmm.
For a lot of us, the simplest thing we can do is pick up the phone and have a
Mm-hmm.
conversation and ask the person, I'm curious what you meant by that.
Mm-hmm.
And very quickly, the confusion, the conflict, the chaos that's created by these synchronous communications devices will be removed. And people say to me, Oscar, doesn't this take longer? And I always say, compared to what? Compared
Right.
to all those emails you're
Mm-hmm.
sending yourself?
Mm-hmm.
In the beginning, it takes a little longer, but long term, it takes a lot less.
Mm-hmm.
Projects that run over schedule often are a result of lack of listening.
Mm-hmm.
Missed customer sales, often a result of lack of listening. Employees that leave the organization, most people say they don't leave their organization, they leave their manager. And the number one reason why people leave their manager is they say they're being ignored and not
Mm-hmm.
listened to. Now, whether we look at the Deepwater Horizon off the coast of Louisiana, not too far from you, in fact, Deb,
Mm-hmm.
or we look at the global financial crisis, there were people who were saying there were problems with the oil rig to
Mm-hmm.
management well before the oil rig started to
Right.
fail and create $50 billion worth of damage for
Mm-hmm.
BP. The global financial crisis, Dr. Rajan, a vegetarian who loved reading Tolkien, who was an electrical engineer by training, spoke at the Jackson Hole, Wyoming Central Bankers Conference in 2005, 3 years before the
Mm-hmm.
global crisis, and used this magical phrase, the global financial system's plumbing is backed up and are about to explode, and the smell will be terrible. What an amazing visual image. But when he presented that paper on the Saturday morning around 10:30, he was castigated by
Right.
US and
Mm-hmm.
European central bankers because he wasn't a classically trained economist. And for a
Mm-hmm.
lot of us, we ignore opinions that aren't the same as ours. So one
Mm-hmm.
of the things we need to do is explore what's different in other people's language and ask, oh, what's that about, rather than ignoring it and saying, of course, they're wrong. And
Mm-hmm.
we can't do that on email. We can't
Right.
do that on text.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have this asynchronous
Mm-hmm.
dialogue like we're having right now, Deb.
Right, right. And it doesn't count if you put an emoji or an LOL or any, no, that's not having a good conversation.
It's a little bit better than text, but as I
Mm,
said, nothing's going to beat this. This conversation remind me of a client I was working with. Mick was a CEO, and I was working with him on a 90-day listening program to help him improve his listening in his organization. And I remember, because I got this phone call about 8:15 on a Monday morning, and Mick said to me, "You nearly cost me my marriage last Friday."
oh,
And all I said was, "Tell me more."
hmm,
And he said, my wife had put the kids to bed. I'd cleared the dinner table, and she sat down at the dinner table when she'd come downstairs from putting the kids to bed and said, those magical words
We
that all
need to
men have.
talk.
We need to talk, Mick. Fear was racing through
Mhm.
his body. He was very much in a tense situation. So he sat down next to his wife and she said, I can handle it. Just tell me the truth. Who are you having an affair with? And in that moment, all he could think of was, tell me more,
Mhm.
which is one of the things we
Right. One
spend a
of the
lot
things
of
you say that
time.
we should do. Mhm.
His wife in that moment said, for the last 90 days, I know you're having an affair. I know you're covering something up because you're paying me so much attention. And in that moment, Mick put his hand on her hand and said, it's not what you think. And she threw his hands out of the way,
Mhm.
screamed at him and said, just tell me the truth.
Mhm.
Who is it?
And he said,
And
Oscar?
Mick is a bit of a troublemaker. He said, all right, I'm going to tell you the truth, but don't be shocked. She goes, I can handle it. He goes, it's a man. And in that moment, she burst into tears because she finally discovered what was going on. And he
Mhm.
went, no, 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 it's not that.
Mhm.
I've been working with this man for the last 90 days to improve my listening. And she breathed out and she relaxed. And she said something that when Mick explained it to me, stays with me for the rest of my life. She said, Mick, I've never felt sexier than I have in the last 90 days. For the
Oh.
whole of our 12 years of
Mhm.
marriage, just because you've been paying me so much attention. Now, what happened next was completely R-rated, and I can't go on to
Right, right.
describe what he
We can
told
kind of
me.
go there. Mhm.
But but Mick said to me, and I always warn my clients, please don't try this at home. The what I've told you is for the workplace, and it might
Mhm.
have some unintended
Mhm.
consequences in your home life. And as he went to explain what was going on over the next couple of weeks and shared with his wife the techniques that they were using, um, I don't think anything I create is about improving relationships at home, but as a
But it
side
works.
benefit,
Mhm.
the techniques you use to improve your listening will have an impact in the workplace,
Mhm.
but also it'll have an impact on relationships at
Mhm.
home, whether it's with your parents, your significant other, your children, it might be even your own siblings. You see, Deb, listening is situational
Mhm.
and it's relational.
Mhm.
You'll listen differently to a policeman than you will to a fireman.
Mhm.
You'll listen differently to a nurse than you will to a doctor. You will listen differently to a lawyer than you will listen to an accountant.
Mm.
You'll listen differently to your mother than you will your daughter.
Mhm.
And for a lot of us, we just need to be conscious that we will listen differently in different
Mhm.
situations. But what gets in our way? Our listening villains. Our listening villains get in our way consistently. Our listening villains have come out of the research from the 1,410 people we were talking about earlier on. And one of the things we have is all four of these listening villains in us.
Mhm.
Now, it's not who we are, it's just how we listen. So I'm always conscious of labels. Labels are productive until they're not. So maybe you'll discover which one of these listening villains frustrates you the most while you're listening to them. There's four listening villains: the dramatic listener, the interrupting listener, the lost listener, and the shrewd listener. The dramatic listener loves listening to your conversation. They listen for emotion. They listen to
Mm.
feel, and they're listening for the drama in your story.
Mhm.
And no matter what story you tell, they're going to tell a story that's more dramatic. We're going through a terrible merger at work. It's really difficult. Well, you think your merger is bad. Let me tell you about the merger we had. Oh, I've got the world's worst boss. Oh, you think you've got a bad boss? Let me tell you about mine. So the dramatic listener loves your story because it creates a stage for them to
Mhm.
perform on and bring more drama to the conversation. The interrupting listening villain is a problem solver. They're there to help, but in their desire to help, they fix the wrong problem. The minute they breathe out as the speaker, the interrupting listener thinks that's their commercial break to intervene with a solution. Now, most people haven't explained what their real problem is, and the interrupting listener is already jumping
Mhm.
in their enthusiasm, in their excitement to bring a solution to the next thing that the speaker is going to say. The third listening villain is the lost listener. They're stuck. They're stuck before a conversation, listening to their own story in their own head.
Mm.
They're lost trying to figure out, should they be here? What should they contribute?
Mhm.
They're lost. They're trying to figure out their place in this story. And the lost listener looks really vague. They look really zoned out.
Mhm.
They look like they shouldn't be there. But they're trying hard and they're trying to stay in the moment. In fact, they might just be distracted in that moment and get lost by the story you're telling them because it reminds them of some other event that happened in their past. And then the final villain, the shrewd listener. The shrewd listener is amazing. They give great nonverbal signals. They tilt their head. They say, mm-huh. They say, tell me more. They seem genuinely curious. But if there was captioning on what was going on in their brain at the time, what you would see in the captioning is, oh my goodness, this is such a basic problem. I wish they'd hurry up and describe it because I can solve it pretty quickly because I'm a really good expert in that problem. And I can't believe they haven't anticipated problem 2, 3, and 4 that
Mhm.
come around as a result of that. Disproportionately represented in the medical profession, the legal profession, the accounting profession, the sales profession, any support function such as human
Mhm.
resources or IT. The shrewd listener consistently solves the wrong problem because they are anticipating all the other problems
Mhm.
that the person might have. Now, while you're listening to the dramatic, the interrupting, the lost and the shrewd listener, think about the listener that you hate the most, the one that frustrates you the most, the one that really annoys you. Who comes to mind, Deb, for you?
Oh, it's funny. It's the interrupting, and I'm an interrupting. I mean, I've interrupted you several times. And maybe it's that, well, I don't want to be interrupted. So, but yeah, the interrupting, I think, is the one that annoys me the most.
Yeah. And you've beautifully shown to all of us the one you can relate to the most is most likely the one you are, because it's very difficult to discover the characteristics in listening villains unless you are close to them
Mhm.
themselves. If you want to take the listening quiz yourself, you can visit listeningquiz.com, and there's a simple set of questions and you'll discover who your listening villains are and 3 simple steps to do something
Mhm.
about that as well. Now, for me, I'm a shrewd listener at work and I'm a lost listener at home.
Mhm.
So that's how listening shows up as situational
Mhm.
and relational. At home, we have complete chaos on the weekend. We have grandchildren over and we have in-laws over and we have lots going on. And if I hear the story about the camera lens settings for my brother-in-laws one more time, it's like I feel like I could tell the story myself and I get completely lost.
Mhm.
You know, my idea of a camera is a cell phone and their idea of a camera is something very complex, very sophisticated. And for me, I get lost in those kinds of conversations. And yet at work, my challenge as a listener, I'm not perfect, far from it. That's why I'm teaching it. I'm trying to teach myself as much as anybody else. I show up as a shrewd listener and my work is to slow down and pause and be present in the moment, and I use the water as a way. The minute I go, I'm solving the problem, I drink the water, and that creates a circuit breaker in my
Mhm.
brain to remind me to listen fully to the person. And that might help you too if you're an interrupting listener or a shrewd listener. Just drink water while they're describing the problem. That will slow your mind down
Mhm.
just a little bit longer. So for most of us, Deb, we can relate to one of those 4. The good news is we have all elements of those 4 villains in us and they show up at different
Mhm.
times. Men generically listen to fix, and women generically listen to feel.
Mhm.
So for the men out there listening, stop trying to fix your women. They aren't broken. Just listen.
Right. And how many times when you ask someone, a woman, what do they want in a man? They will tell you, I want someone who listens, especially
Hmm.
once they get a little older.
And apparently that makes them really sexy.
Hmm. Right, right. It was funny when you were mentioning the shrewd listener. I really did think of sales and marketing people because we're
Mm.
told find someone's pain and solve it. That's what we're creating our product or our service for. And because we know what that is, we leap ahead in that conversation. And we are just really trying to be helpful, but it could be and in many cases it probably is, that they either, that's just the start of the problem, or they solve that. And as you said, most of the time we don't start with what really the issue is. So, if we're leaping ahead and solving the problem, we never even heard their problem.
Yeah, and I was lucky enough to be trained by three great salespeople. Interestingly enough, all had Scottish heritage. One first generation, one second generation, and one third generation. So I don't know what it is about Scottish and selling, but I'm very grateful for the lesson they taught me. And each of them, Andrew and Harry, both called Harry, said something really powerful to me once. They said, if you can describe the customer's problem more eloquently to them than they can, they already think you have the solution despite the fact you might not.
Hmm.
So in simply being able to empathize with that person, to be in that moment, to take a little bit longer and ask what else or tell me more, becomes quite crucial. Oh, we're going back now to 2012, where I was running a workshop with about 12 people in it. It was a leadership team, Deb, and it was one of those very narrow rooms. It was quite dusty. It wasn't set up ideally for a workshop. And it was about 10 to 12, and the CEO looked at me and said, lunch is coming at 12. And I said, that's the plan on our agenda.
Hmm.
And we were doing a really simple exercise with the leadership team. Describe this organization as an animal. And we'd got through 10, 11 people, and they all described this organization as some kind of swooping bird of prey, an osprey, an eagle, something that moved fast,
Hmm.
something that could soar high, something that could have great eyesight. And we're now at 12 o'clock and we still have one person to go, Deb. The CEO's looking at me. If we were in a comic strip, he'd have laser beams
Hmm.
exploding my
And
head
he's
because
going.
he's doing exactly what Deb was just doing. He pointed to his watch and said, the food's coming in. And we haven't heard from the last person, Elaine. Elaine
Hmm.
was a card-carrying member of the introvert community.
Hmm.
How do you know a card-carrying member of the introvert community? You often say, hey, put your hand up if you're an extrovert. And then you have to say, no, I said put your hand up, not stand up. And then if you're a kind of omnivert, you'll probably put your hand up if you ask who are the introverts. Card-carrying members of the introvert community will never identify themselves. They'll never
Hmm.
put their hand up.
Right.
And Elaine was one of those people. Now, I just turned to her and I just gestured with my left palm out as if to say, I'd like to make an invitation
Hmm.
for you to speak. And all she could say was, it seemed really obvious to me we're a snake.
Hmm.
Now, in that moment, the tension in the room went up dramatically. Deb, what's going through your mind when you think about the characteristics of a snake?
Slimy, nasty, poisonous.
Hmm. Anything else?
Oh, restrictive, like a boa. They're going to
Yeah.
squeeze the life out of you.
Yeah. So
Um,
generally
mhm.
negative terms when it comes.
Cold-blooded might be,
Cold-blooded. Yeah. So I stepped beside Elaine and simply said, "Tell me more." And she
Mhm.
said, "Well, I thought it was obvious because snakes anticipate, and they do that by sensing ahead,
Mhm.
and they shed their skin. And one thing we've always done well is we have sensed ahead for our customers, and we've shed our skin to evolve to what we
Mm.
needed to for our customers, and we've forgotten that." Now, what you don't know about Eileen is her cultural background is Chinese, and the
Mm.
Chinese have a very different relationship with snakes
Right. Very
than we
positive.
than we do in the
Mhm.
West. And in that moment, a huge conversation started, and at 12:32, I remember this because it's kind of tattooed in my brain, we finished that conversation, which was supposed to stop at noon.
Mhm.
And the CEO stood up and said, "It's time for lunch, but I'm really grateful that we had this conversation because it's opened up new
Mhm.
possibilities for us." And that organization transformed its growth profile, not only because of that conversation,
Mhm.
but probably some extent listening to voices that aren't heard and
Mhm.
listening to differing opinions. Now, they quickly used snakes as code names for their product releases. They had snake beanie toys. They started telling
I
those
love it.
stories in internal meetings.
Mhm.
But again, how many people don't we listen to that have got great
Mhm.
stories that can change our perspective,
Right.
that can have an impact beyond words,
Mhm.
because we're too busy with this arbitrary
Mhm.
timeline at noon to get sandwiches because we
Mhm.
thought we were hungry.
Right. Well, and I had a negative impression of snakes and she had a positive impression of snakes. And so that's another, and so, I would have had to have listened to her to see why she was saying, no, no, this is a good thing.
Hmm. And again, most of us don't take that time
Right.
because we're too busy solving. We're too busy wanting to
Mhm.
get our opinion across. We're just too busy. And again, if you just take the moment, drink that glass of water, pause. Now at the lunch break while the CEO was having his lunch, he made a point to come into the room where I was reorganizing um, butcher paper and a whole bunch of sticky notes that we've been using for the afternoon session. He goes, "I was so angry with you." And what I realized was I was just angry at myself for not pausing and taking the time to hear from everybody on my leadership team.
Mhm.
I simply said to him, I said, "Ian, how deliberate are you from hearing from everybody who's invited to the team meeting, or are you just deliberate in listening to the people who speak the most?"
Mhm.
And he said, "Well, I'm guilty of that. I'm one of those people that speak the most. So, you've taught me a valuable lesson today." Well, I said, "Well, I think Elaine is the one who's kind of taught you that valuable lesson, not
Mhm.
me. And we just need to come to situations where we're comfortable to just wait long enough to hear from everybody
Mhm.
because you never know what you'll hear."
Right. Well, and we want to hear our opinion echoed back to us. How many times has the CEO or the leader of, whatever it is, they only want to hear the people who are going to tell them what they want to hear. And
Mm,
so even if you're a person who has a different viewpoint, you either know, okay, he's not going to call on me, or he doesn't want to hear what I have to say, or I could really get in trouble if I say it.
mm.
And so that's one of the big issues is, giving people the opportunity to be able to have that diverging viewpoint and be able to comfortably and safely say it.
And as somebody who works with chairs, boards, leadership teams, CEOs very regularly, one of their biggest frustrations is the minute they move into these leadership roles, they're not able to hear
Hmm.
what they need to move the
Right.
organization forward, because most people believe what you've just said, Deb.
Hmm.
They have their own filters on, and they believe that they need to tell the leaders what they want to hear.
Hmm.
Whereas if you Deepwater Horizon accident, they were telling the leader the truth. The leader just
Hmm.
didn't want to hear it
Right.
on the oil rig, and that
Hmm.
had huge consequences, not only financial, but 11 lives lost
Hmm. Right.
because leaders weren't listening.
Hmm. Right. One of the things you mentioned, and I've been thinking about this the whole time we've been having this conversation, is the room that you were in and how it didn't always, facilitate, good conversation. And I realized that how I have this interview set up doesn't always facilitate good conversation. And for those who are just listening to this, Oscar has a black backdrop, and that's it. Just that is the only thing that's there. I have all sorts of things behind me. And there's a little fuzzy puppy, and there's logos, there's a picture, there's words, all these various things, which I think makes it look interesting because those are things that are important to me. But as we were talking, I thought, how distracting is that? To the person that I'm talking with, and whether it's, in person like we're doing here, or true face to face with somebody who is actually in my office, are they going to get so distracted looking at what's around me that they're not going to listen? Or I'm also not going to be listening to them. And so I was just thinking, if you really want somebody to listen, we need to simplify things. And you made it very simple. One of the things you did was you whisper. And it's funny because there used to be that commercial here in the United States. If you want to get someone's attention, you whisper. And that is kind of that too. You get their attention. Unfortunately, we are almost at the top of the hour. Oh my gosh, Oscar, this has just been so cool because we didn't talk about pauses. And I really want to talk about that. So we just need to have you on again because there are so many other things. We also didn't get to talk about your fabulous product because one of the things that's in this handy dandy box are these cards. There are all these cards in here. And since we didn't have time to talk about them, I'm just going to show them and tell people that they are available, but we'll have to have you on again so that we can really talk about the importance of these cards. Because when I was going through them, I thought, oh, these are really pretty cool. I like these. So, it's going to be fun to have you on again to talk more about this because as we said, listening is something that we don't do. And even when we do it, we don't do it well. And so I look forward to having you on again. But tell us a little bit more about what you do and how you can work with people to improve their listening.
Look, the simplest thing for everybody, if they want to take another step in their journey to becoming a better listener each day, is just visit listeningquiz.com. That will give you access to the book, the playing cards, the jigsaw puzzle, the Apple Award-winning podcast where we interview professional and personal listeners like High Court judges, FBI hostage negotiators,
Mm,
journalists, palliative care nurses, doctors, deaf interpreters, foreign language interpreters. So you can access this, but listening quiz will also help you start on the journey to take the quiz and start you on the journey to knowing who your villain is
mhm,
so you can start to do something about it. Listening is your birthright. Listening is something you need to not learn, but just go back and unlearn all the stuff that's
mhm.
around you right now. So take the time, and listeningquiz.com is the starting place for that journey, Dan.
Perfect. I love it. Well, is that where people would reach out and connect with you?
Yep, all those kind of social things and LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter stuff, that's all there in at listeningquiz.com.
Perfect. I love it. Well, this really has been fascinating and I think just so important because as I said at the start, I'm not a good listener. So, the more that we can all work on this, I think the better it will be. I don't want to be the interrupting listener. And so, it's going to be so much fun to have you on again. But until then, tell us again how people find you and connect with you.
Listeningquiz.com is the starting place for your listening journey, and that will be the simplest place to do that. Thanks for playing today. You've been a
Perfect. I
great
love
listener,
it.
Deb.
I've
Thanks
tried.
for
I've
listening.
tried. Well, until then, do you have any final thoughts for everyone?
Listening's your birthright. It's something as simple as switching off your cell phone, your laptops, and your tablets if you want to double your listening productivity and move from listening in black and white to listening in color. That's the simplest thing. You'll double your listening productivity. Just switch off your cell phone.
Oh, I love it. And, like we said, folks, the world will not come to an end. And I tell you what, you're probably going to feel better in the long run for missing a lot of that stuff. Your blood pressure will go down. You'll be able to breathe deeply, all these various things. So, don't turn it off now because we want you to catch the program. But until next time, I'm Deb Creer. I've been having an absolutely wonderful time talking with Oscar Trimboli, and everyone have a great day.
Tune in for our next program for even more trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. The Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer, is proud to be part of the C-Suite Network.